True story. So my first day of my first year at St. Balasar University, I show up an empty-handed stranger to this house party down the road from campus. The house is huge. 3 stories if you count the garage under the hill, but it's still packed. It's like flesh is just seeping out of the walls. I'm wigging out, not even sure whether to get out of the Uber. This is not my scene. But I'm an idiot, so I walked in trying to act like I belonged there, and before I can blink, I've lost the people I've come in with. The only people here that I know. I'm the youngest person by at least 2 years, and I had never been to a real party before. Ever. There I am, lurking in the kitchen, burgling Peebers, speaking German with Spaniards, shouldering Australians. Not one person in the house a friend to me. I'm a barbarian in Avalon. But eventually, either due to my stolen extrovert potions or carbon monoxide buildup, I start to have a good time. The Spaniards actually speak really good German. Some Australians draw me in for Flip Cup and they don't seem to mind that I suck at it. And then, the very quarter of a split second I start to actually have fun, blue lights burst through the drape windows. I thought I was going to die. People are crying out, clamoring over each other, streaming out of the house and running into the night. You could make it back to campus on foot, but I didn't know where I was and my phone was dead. My only hope is this motorcade of Ubers gathering in front of the house. I just dive towards the first van I see with an open door, only to find every seat full. In an act of collective kindness I've never seen before or since, the riders and drivers alike tell me to sit on the floor. So I oblige them, sandwiched between the legs of a couple guys from my dorm, one of them staring down at me. I can't remember what his name is or where he's from. Some traveler from an antique land. Wherever he came from, he's in space now, out of his gourd. He said, what did he say? He was going on and on about how two vast
and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
You know, come to think of it, I'm pretty sure he was British. Some moron snake oil salesman once said that your first book is your hardest. Writing is a lonely, thankless, frustrating, impossible endeavor, but it's never going to be as hard as novel 1. That made a certain level of sense to me. Your first language is the hardest to learn, your first job is the hardest to get, your first instrument is the hardest to master. So it stands to reason that the same would be true for writing a novel. A few years ago, I had written a couple short stories, tried my hand at a novel-length work or two, but despite how much I enjoyed writing, my writing time had been stolen rather than found. But then, around mid-2020, certain circumstances in the world changed, and I had a sort of twofold revelation. I needed to get serious about writing, and I probably would never have as much spare time as I do right now. I brought an old passion project up the well, a weird fantasy story that I used to love. And it was like reuniting with an old friend. As I started to write, everything just fell into place. I was in the zone. I knew that this was the flashpoint. Every good idea I've ever had rolled into one package. I was determined to bring this into reality. After months writing it all out, I edited it like 3.5 times, went through alpha readers, went through sigma readers, tightening every tiny detail until it creaked under its own weight. It was this big hustle, but I never lost faith in the end result. I kept telling myself, finish novel 1 and nothing will be this hard again. And then suddenly, so quickly that I barely noticed it happen, It's done. I have a book. And I don't mean a perfect book. I'd long ago given up on it being perfect. I mean a book that exists independently from me or any of the notes I've written outside of the work's corpus. Without having any idea who I am, you can read it and understand the things I was trying to say, love or hate characters that I've poured myself into. I cannot describe to you the feeling of listening to two people discuss your work, trading predictions like it was a real book that they were reading for fun. But there's just one problem. The book sucks. I know, that's not the kind of talk that we stand for at the English Club podcast. It's not bad, not in the way that Sonic High School has glaring technical errors. It doesn't have a lot of plot holes or inconsistencies for booktubers to pick apart for 8 hours. It's not a reflection of my weird political beliefs and proclivities like Empress Teresa. It's not even a vehicle for my own ego, not more so than any other work of art inherently is, anyways. It's bad in a way that I think is worse. The final product I've created is completely incongruous with my vision. I wanted to create X, but I ended up creating Y. Where the f*** did that extra leg go? So whatever, right? I've done too many of these podcast episodes now to think that I'm above killing my darlings. This isn't something I'm going to be querying anytime soon, and I'm getting tired of editing. I need to get over it and move on to the next. Besides, now that novel 1 is done, nothing will be as hard, right? Right? So I had 2 other fleshed out ideas for novels. I started working on the one that seemed more breezy and by the numbers. I bought a notebook to plot longhand, I bought a corkboard to arrange scenes, I wrote a few puny character bios on index cards and tried to map out the beats of the story. So far so good. With the foundation laid out for at least the first couple acts, I fired up YWriter and began working on the first draft. In a few days, I get to chapter 5. And then all of a sudden, my productivity grinds to a halt. I can only compare the feeling to physical instability. I could feel myself teetering in the air on top of the chapters I'd written. I was asking myself, should I keep building on this? Should I go back and restructure the previous chapters? Or is the very foundation of my story just flawed? I didn't know exactly what was wrong, but I was convinced that writing a full novel gave me a sixth sense into stuff like this. Keep in mind, I'd just been editing novel 1 for a long time. This was the first time I'd written scenes from scratch since I'd started with alpha readers. So I did expect some issues getting back into the swing of things. So I tried all 3 options, and they all proved ineffective for various reasons. Taking this as a sign, I tabled the project and picked up novel number 3. This one was a little more literary and slow-paced, letting me focus on language rather than action. I figured this was the problem. Novel 1 was slow and experimental, so novel 2 being tropey and action-packed might have been too great a jump. I changed up my process a bit, outlining a lot more in advance in hopes that it would motivate me. If you want to know how that's going, just look at my corkboard now. Now I knew that the problem was squarely with me. Trying to give myself grace, I slowed down and really focused on feeling out my writing process, trying to listen to what that sixth sense was actually saying to me. And that's when I realized, that sixth sense isn't my own voice. I write a scene and I can feel Joshua getting bored. I can see Lanny Sarum rolling her eyes at my romance. J.A. Johnstone wouldn't like how I wrote that action scene. Ben Shapiro would think my social commentary is heavy-handed. Onision and Norman Boutin alike are laughing at how I handle religion. None of these voices are mine. Make no mistake, this is not a dig at the people who critiqued novel 1. I had the best critique group in the world. They were respectful, thorough, and incredibly helpful. What I'm saying here is that everyone has preferences, biases, opinions, pet peeves, and these things are brought to the fore when you subject them to 180,000 words of your own writing. That was what I had the sixth sense for, not the writing itself. So I made the decision to take a break from writing cold turkey. Regroup, maybe play some Minecraft or something. In case you're curious from my last video on the subject, my Minecraft server isn't doing too well. The visitor list has dropped down to 0, not counting me, of course. My friends have all moved on, and even griefers don't seem to be interested. I'd have taken it down by now, but The computer I have the server hosted on seems to have forgotten it exists. I don't really know what's going on. Email me if you know anything about Linux, but until then, I guess I'm stuck with it. So on my writing sabbatical, I took on a couple new projects in the server, finishing up some buildings and starting on some others. But there was something morbid about tinkering with half-built machines, abandoned monuments, farms producing impossible excess with no ultimate destination. All of these grandiose intents I had came to an unceremonious halt. Well, déjà vu. I moved as far away from spawn as I could, effectively starting a new world, but even that didn't help. I couldn't rationalize all that effort that would just go into making new ruins. Maybe I need a new game. A perfect game, remembered as a wonderfully executed classic with no sinking feeling of loneliness and failure. I'm talking, of course, about Jurassic Park Trespasser.
My name is John Parker Hammond. I was born on March 14th, 1928. What follows is a record of certain events in which I took part between the years 1980 and 1997, on an island I will call Site B. Site B was not to be a theme park, but a research station. This was where we did the real work.
I love Trespasser. I could talk about this for days. I love the horrible physics engine. I love how the janky, bouncing dinosaurs just chase you with their mouth agape and hope that gets you. I love the disproportionately good voice acting, the atmosphere, the gunplay. Every little asinine thing about it just amazes me.
Feels about half.
This is what I've been looking for. This is fun. This is art. This sucks. Huh. Okay. I think it's... Okay. Fork! Oh my god. Jurassic Park Trespasser was supposed to be the video game. It was supposed to be this infinitely replayable survival horror where every single dinosaur has its own personality and behaviors depending on the time of day. You would be able to control the player's hands in a fully interactable environment with no pre-rigged animations. Everything from the physics of holding a gun to the dinosaur's movement over terrain would be calculated in the moment, with an unparalleled graphics engine and sound design. It was going to be a world unto itself. Every good idea rolled into one package. If you think that sounds insane and way too much for a game made in 1998, you are absolutely right. Just about everything the team set out to achieve turned out wrong. The most obvious problem is it's hard enough to control one arm with the level of freedom that the team wanted, so now our hero has a broken arm. The AI didn't work right, so they just set all the carnivores' aggression to 100 and the herbivores to 0, and I'm pretty sure they didn't even do that right. You're welcome. I understand you're mad at me. I set off a lot of loud noises. The lack of consistent animations led to that weird bouncy chase thing that the dinosaurs do, and then the textures aren't consistent, the physics is too quirky. They've decompiled the whole thing, and it's such a tightly wound ball of spaghetti that it's not even worth combing through. And all of this is on my machine today. Back when this first came out, so much nothing was going on under the hood that most computers at the time couldn't even run it. Trespasser is an awful game. I know this, but my love for it isn't made any less genuine because of it. I love it for what it tried to do, but I also love it for what it actually did accomplish. The legacy that it had. Again, let's go back in time to 1998. The graphics, where the textures are correctly mapped to the models, are genuinely impressive. Without Trespasser's attempt, we wouldn't have many of the physics engine-focused games we have today, most notably Half-Life. They stripped so much out of the game that it couldn't really be called a survival horror anymore, but that same emptiness coupled with a barren sound design leads to a feeling of isolation, like you genuinely are stranded on a dinosaur island. Even the janky arm mechanics have at least been repurposed time and time again for comedy in other games. The development team made some stupid decisions. They made too many good decisions. The final product could not have been what the developers had in mind. But the creation of Trespasser was not a waste, neither as constituent parts nor as a whole. I like to imagine what was going on through the Trespasser team's heads as they were all working on this. At what point they realized that this just wasn't working. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe each and every person on the team was completely convinced that the mighty would look upon their works in despair. Up until the bitter end. They didn't listen to their internal editors. They didn't have the time. It had to be done. And I actually think that's a very liberating sentiment. I'd almost forgotten that that's what writing used to feel like for me. An imperative. Before I had Joshua's voice in my head with a comment about every line I wrote, I didn't care whether I did it well. It just had to be done. And when I look back at all my awful writing from high school, middle school, whatever, I don't see failure. I don't see failure when I play Trespasser. These things would only have been failures had they never existed. Just like other games salvage Trespasser's strengths, I need to take what I've done and move it somewhere else. And again, and again. And I think that's the key to writer's block. Other kings came after Ozymandias. Other games came after Trespasser. And I can write more crappy books. And speaking of my freshman year, one Saturday morning in September or October, I'm writing an early prototype of Novel 1 when my roommate comes in. He was a nocturnal Ecuadorian exchange student. By now, we generally ignored each other's comings and goings, but this time warranted some attention. He'd been gone for a few days now. I'd assumed he was out at some girl's dorm, but this dude walks into the room a model of visual storytelling. One eye's bruised up, he's got a split lip, wrists sprained, every manner of cut on his face and up his arms. He better not have been at some girl's dorm. Apparently, late that last Wednesday, he and some friends went out to smoke at the park by campus. A cop happened to be patrolling the place and noticed my roommate peeing on a tree. Either for public urination or being drunk in the middle of a park at 3 a.m., the cop considered that grounds for arrest. And either due to Four Loko or just the thrill of it, my roommate ran. The chase ended in my roommate crashing into a bush and an unceremonious arrest. I listened in numb shock as he recounted the story. Not because I was particularly surprised that it happened, but because he was completely nonchalant in telling me about it. I asked him whether he was worried about any of this. I couldn't imagine his exchange program was very tolerant of legal trouble. "I don't care if I get arrested or die," he told me. This isn't a lead up to a bit, this is literally what he told me. "I will live my life. To me, it was just another Wednesday." I watched as my roommate preened himself, utterly confident of his right to be there, absolutely no consciousness that he was not the sovereign ruler of this earth. He had no inner editor. He urinated on that tree because he had to, and he ran because he wanted to. It was just another Wednesday. And I think there's beauty in that.